What's up, brah? I gotta get this engine block machined. Trying to make 1,000 horsepower daily driver. Should be pretty sweet. So yeah, just machine it. What do you mean? What dimensions do you need? And what do I want done? Dude, here's the cylinder head. I think they call this an engine block, and the crank's over there. Just machine it. 1,000 horsepower daily, bro. Come on. Everybody does it. I don't know. If it's standard, just make it standard. If it ain't, then I don't know. You're the machinist. You do the math. What do you mean? Do I need a valve job? The heck does that sound like? They look fine. Put new seals on these. They ain't leaking. Ream the valve guides. Why would I do that? I don't know. Just make it good. Make it hold 1,000 horse. Why are you asking me all these questions? How's it going tonight, guys? As you saw by that intro, today we're going to be covering talking to the machine shop. I have personally seen people, maybe not that bad, I kind of exaggerated to make you guys laugh. I've personally seen people that walk into a machine shop fully intent on getting their engine machined and don't know what to ask for. So we're just going to kind of go over the basics today. When you go to the machine shop, there are certain things you need to know. For starters, you need to know, sorry, forgot to get these out. You really need to know what you're going to use the engine for. Alright, because a lot of the measurements are determined off of that. For high performance engines, you need more piston to wall, you need bigger ring gaps, especially with nitrous. If you're going to be running just Grandpa's tow truck or something like that, then you can stick with the more factory clearances. Most machine shops do not care about diesel trucks, and they don't do it, especially if you live on kind of the west coast. A lot of the machine shops, they'll still do it, but they just don't care. It's not their bread and butter. The machine shop I deal with out here, they're getting better, but especially when it comes to something beyond a daily driver, they really have a hard time, so you kind of gotta break it down to them. I'm not calling these people stupid at all. These people will school me on anything V8 gas related. They are really intelligent guys, but you need to be able to speak intelligently to them to get your point across on what you want machined. Most people, when they go to the machine shop, they'll take a cylinder head or they'll take the whole engine like we have here. On the cylinder head, on a 12 valve, the seats are actually part of the head. On a common rail, they actually are pressed in, an interference press. So on a 12 valve, you can get, obviously if you need fire rings, on my phone I have Hazley's instructions pulled up, and you'll be able to give them to them, or if you buy the fire ring kit, they come with instructions for the machinists. You can get your valve seals and valve guides redone in the cylinder head, and that will help with oil control, especially if you have a high mileage engine. That is something they'll ream it out, and then they'll put a kind of like a insert to bring it back down to standard, and then the valve job they'll do to make sure your valves are actually sealing. The other thing you want to do first is always have them pressure test this cylinder head, because if it's cracked, don't even waste your money, just get a new one and start fresh. Nothing like wasting money on a head that was junk to begin with. Then you're going to want to have the pistons you plan on using. On this truck, or sorry, this engine, the machine shop I dealt with up in Utah actually does a lot of diesel machining, so they actually had pistons to kind of go off of. But it's always a good idea to bring the pistons that you want to put in there. Now, the only downside to that is kind of what happened to me on this engine. I had to go 20 over, and that caused me to have to buy new pistons, and luckily I measured correctly. The other thing you want to do is you want to bring your hardware, especially if they're doing anything with your block, honing it or boring it. They'll use a torque plate hopefully. If not, then oh well. I've had engines machined without it. I know it's not recommended, but it can be done. But you want to bring good fastening hardware, especially for the main studs. This is what they use to actually torque the caps to determine if it is out of spec and how to correct it. The other thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to bring a head gasket. You're going to want to know what head gasket you want to end up with. This is a standard head gasket. When they surface the cylinder head and the engine deck, you're actually making the distance smaller. Some people run a larger head gasket to compensate for that if it really is big. I'm not a big fan of that. I would rather see somebody fly cut the piston than run an oversized head gasket, especially in like a performance application. The larger the gasket is in thickness, the more you have to seal in that head gasket. You know, the thinner it is, the less chance of a blowout. So for engine machining, you have what's called a surface. That's where they run this huge stone over it and they surface it flat. You can ask them to drill and tap your head studs if you're running like a 14 mil stud. Same thing in the main studs. If you're going to run a 14 mil main stud, they can drill and tap it for you, make sure it's square. Then you have, if you were going to do a fire ring, you can have them cut the fire ring half in the deck of the block and half in the deck of the cylinder head. And then you have what's called boring and honing. Yikes. Well, I guess we'll go here. Pretty heavy to move by myself. But you can see here, hopefully you can. Let me bring you guys in a little closer here. You can see all of my mains have been machined. This process is called line honing. They machine 3/1000ths off the cap, the part that goes from here to here. It sits like this to make it smaller, and then they run a line hone through to true up all of your mains. Alright, then on the front, try and pick this thing back up. This thing's heavy. I tell you what, if you're going to do a video, make sure you got a partner. You can see here, this is that cam bushing I was telling you all about. This is a fresh one that they pressed in, so we're good to go. The other thing that you can do, I didn't do it, but you can actually have them make the cam journals larger to accept bushings in all of them. High horsepower, big builds, it's actually not a bad idea. For what I'm doing, wasn't needed. So, you get told the bad news, your engine bores won't clean up at standard. They tried to hone it, no luck. Not the end of the world. You can get an engine bored over. Now, generally a 5.9 you can go 20 over, 40 over, and 60 over. Just keep in mind, the larger the bore becomes, the weaker the in-between cylinder walls become. On a 6.7, the only option I've seen is 20 over, due to the steam ports being in here and just the general bore size being much larger. There's not a lot of meat left. Now, the other thing, once you get done at the machine shop, they are going to knock out your oil galley plugs. This one right here, I pressed the new one in, and this one as well. So there's two on the back side here, this one, and then there is two on the front as well. One kind of down low, one up towards the top. Once that's done, you're going to want to take you're going to want to clean this engine block. I'll kind of go through cleaning it. I'll actually clean one on camera for you guys in case you're curious and you want to learn. But basically you just take some nice soapy water and you lather it all up, and you use almost kind of like they're actually called engine brushes. So basically you're going to want to clean out all the oil galleys and all of the cylinder bores with that brush, and you're going to want to clean out all the nooks and crannies. Then you're gonna take a hose, spray it out until you can't see soap coming out, and immediately with a blowgun, air dry it all. You want to blow all the water out as fast as possible. Now, I use this. It's like a ZEP 45 WD-40, and I just spray the entire engine down. Once it's done being machined and you cleaned it, they're gonna leave it in the cutting oil. But it's always a good idea, especially after you clean it, if you're not gonna begin assembly that second, you wanna spray a very, very liberal amount of this spray in there. And what that does is it's creating a coating so that the way these machine surfaces can't rust. Okay? Rust will screw up your brand new machine job. Alright, so we went over boring. Boring an engine means you're actually going like the next size. Honing just means you're cleaning it up. Maybe you got a little bit of out of round, which means the borehole is starting to be an oval. Maybe you have some taper, which means the bore is larger at the top, smaller at the bottom. Now there are specifications for these. They are all over the internet. Cummins field service manuals. I'm not going to post them like they're readily available. Or you guys can send me a message and I'll be happy to send you a few links. The other thing, so boring and honing, you have the cam bushing that can get pressed in, or you can have all 7 journals done. You have getting your mains, it's called line honed, line honed, correct. Sorry, a million miles a minute in my brain. And you just need to make sure upon reassembly that you install the new soft plugs, because if you don't, you will not have oil pressure, you'll have a serious leak, and it will never create oil pressure. You need these soft plugs to block off the oil galleys so the oil pump can actually make pressure. We went over on the cylinder head what needs to be done as well. Lastly, you have your crankshaft, which is right down here. Alright, so you have your crankshaft. Now, if the mains or the rod journals can't be polished, you have to go undersized, in which case you need to buy the appropriate bearings. They're called undersized bearings. Available anywhere you can buy regular bearings. They're not like super rare and stuff like that. Just keep in mind, every time you remove material, you're making the journal smaller, therefore they can be weaker. Just keep that in mind when you're starting to get into those huge horsepower numbers, big torque. You need that material to make it strong. So on that, you can get your mains and main journals, rod journals undersized if they won't cleaned up. If not, you can do what we did, which is a polish. And basically they take like this really funky looking machine and spin your crank and polish the journals. You can also have it balanced, which I did. Basically they spin it and they're gonna check for a bent crank. Basically it'll be out of round. They'll jaw it down here, they'll jaw it up here, and they'll put a dial indicator to make sure that your crank is true. If it is bent, you know, you can buy these cranks online. They are pretty expensive, but if you're gonna be spinning, you know, I would highly recommend just purchasing a new crank instead of destroying a block in the process. And what you're gonna want to do once it's done, same thing, they're gonna spray it down. You just want to clean it up, make sure you spray out all these holes. These are all for oil feeds, and you're gonna want to run a little bore brush through them, kind of clean them up. The only other thing you can do at a machine shop, sometimes they don't offer it, sometimes they do. I'm gonna just do this one myself, is I'm going to weld the crank gear to the crank. Once you get into those high horsepower numbers, I highly suggest it, because you can have the crank gear shift. There is that Woodruff key is what keeps the crank centered, or sorry, the crank gear on the crank. Now if the Woodruff key snaps or starts to hollow out from kind of jerking like this, it'll hollow it out. You will actually cause timing issues, because this gear spins the cam, which is right back here, which spins the cam gear, which then drives your CP3 or your VP44 or P-pump gear, or if you're really unlucky, I guess a VE gear. And yeah, same thing. I like to spray it down, you know, just nice coating, nothing. You'd hate to waste money getting it all machined, especially if you're not putting it together. And then all I do is I take saran wrap and I just wrap it around a whole bunch, seal out as much moisture as possible. Being that I live in California, I am extremely lucky. Most stuff does not rust very quickly. When I used to live in Illinois, that was not the case. Everything rusted extremely fast. Something you need to be aware of. The only other thing I would recommend is make sure you check the machine shop. I trust these guys, Enoch Motorsports. They're up just north of Cedar City, Utah, where Power Driven's at. They do amazing work. I still checked it. Didn't do it in front of them, but I still checked it. I have these T-bar gauges and a set of Powerhouse outside mics, or sorry, yeah, outside micrometers. I have the 0 to 6 set with the calibrations. And is it as fast as a dial bore gauge and stuff like that? No, but for the amount of machining, checking, measuring I do, these work just fine. This is also how I measure bearing clearance. I don't really like plastic gauge. I know it works. I'm really not a fan. I don't judge people that do use it. I mean, it is pretty slick and it's very fast. If I was assembling just daily driver engines and stuff, heck yeah, I'd probably use it. For the amount of engines that I build personally, and for, you know, anybody that wants to buy one that I've built, you know, it doesn't take that much longer to do it the right way, and I feel better putting my name on it or having it in a truck with everybody else's name on it, just knowing that I measured it myself. Hopefully you'll be able to go into a machine shop now and understand some of the terminology. Those guys have like a whole different language. Sometimes I feel like I'm speaking to, I don't know, like a foreign alien. I'm not a machinist. I will never claim to be one. But these are the terms that they use, and this is how you tell them what you want done. Especially if you're going to a machine shop that doesn't do any diesel work. You know, if you live in like Indiana, Kentucky, even Illinois, the Southeast, like those machine shops, you know, there's a lot that do diesel performance and they understand. But if you live in some of the other states where it's not so popular, especially like California, in the Northeast, the Northwest, like this will at least be able to help you convey what you want and get the product that you need. And it will stop you from having to go to the machine shop like 16 times because you forgot, you know, they don't have, most machine shops don't have head studs laying around to use on a torque plate or main studs and stuff like that. So it prevents all that back and forth, back and forth.